I am Marcus James Dixon with Gold Derby, and we would like to welcome Emmanuelle Duplay to our film production design panel for Netflix's Emilia Pérez. And hello also to Stephanie, the translator, who will be helping us out. So first of all, Emmanuelle, what was the initial vision like for the overall look of the sets that you and the director, Jacques, discussed early on in your planning process?
In the beginning of the process, Jacques Audiard wanted to make an opera. So, je vais passer en français. On a d'abord fait des repérages à Mexico, assez poussés. On avait trouvé quasiment tous les décors. Et on est revenu, parce qu'on avait des problèmes de timing, de casting, on est revenu à Paris. Et là, Jacques a décidé de reprendre son idée de base, qui était de tirer le film vers quelque chose de beaucoup plus opératique.
So I will speak in French. So Jacques at first wanted to make an opera. So at first we went scouting in Mexico, and we did quite an extensive scouting. We found all the sets. However, we came back to Paris as we were encountering casting and timing issues. And back in Paris, in the end, Jacques decided to go back to his initial idea, which was to actually make this movie much more operatic.
Mm. And I want to talk about some of the sets specifically. And the first one that really struck me was the crime boss's van that Rita gets kidnapped and taken into. It looked like a really fun, unique space to create. There were video screens on the walls, and there were radio cords that were kind of jiggling as the vehicle was moving. What do you remember most about that set?
Oui, en fait, on s'est pas mal posé la question de dans quel endroit Manitas pouvait habiter. Et on s'est dit, en fait, c'était quelque chose de mouvant en permanence. Donc, c'était très important pour nous, justement, que les choses puissent bouger comme ça pendant que le van roulait. Et en plus, on a profité du fait d'avoir cet espace comme ça fermé pour, à un moment, faire une scène où on enlevait tous les murs et il ne restait plus que les accessoires. Et ça montre bien le travail qu'on a fait sur le film, c'est-à-dire qu'on passait de quelque chose de très concret, très réaliste, à quelque chose de complètement abstrait. Et on a fait ça dans pas mal de décors.
Yes, actually, at first we were wondering, well, where could Manitas live? And we wanted something that was constantly in flux, in movement. It was very important for us. So it was very important for things to move as the van was traveling, moving. On top of it, it was really great to have this enclosed area to use it, and then in this enclosed area, break down all the walls, make it possible for the walls to disappear, and that just remain what would remain were the props, and we could use that. And it was very important because this really illustrates our desire to go from a very realistic location to a very abstract location using this dynamic. And we used it in many different scenes, and it was very important to us.
Mm. And another scene that struck me was the Bangkok Medical Center where Rita visits, and everything is white, and the characters are dancing around kind of on their hospital beds. Was that a set you built, or was that an actual medical facility? And what else can you tell us about that one?
We scout a place a little bit like that in Mexico, and when we were supposed to shoot everything there, and we thought it was quite interesting for the scenography and for the choreography. And so then when we decide to build it in studio, I redraw this circle, and we work special lights with Paul Guillaume, the director of photography, and we organize that the choreography of Damien Jallet can't work with the space. It was really conceived for the choreography, for the movement and for the choreography.
Mm. And I think my favorite set in the whole movie was this London restaurant where Rita sees Emilia for the first time and she says, bingo, that line, that beautiful line. And all of the lights around the set turn off at the same time so they
Mm.
can have their private little moment. What was the collaboration process like? I imagine you had to work with the cinematographer more on that one and maybe some of
Yeah,
the
of
other
course.
departments.
Yeah, we worked really a lot together because Jacques really wanted to be able to um, change a light all the time, and that's a really good demonstration that's a really good example. And yes, ce qu'on voulait montrer, je passe en français, ce qu'on voulait montrer par ce décor, c'est que tout d'un coup, elle était arrivée à ce qu'elle voulait, avocate à succès à Londres. Donc on a vraiment cherché un endroit très sophistiqué pour faire cette rencontre entre les deux. Ouais.
And we wanted to show with the sets that Rita had really reached what she was trying to reach. She was finally a very successful lawyer. So we wanted to have a restaurant, a decor that was extremely sophisticated, that showed this success.
Mm-hmm. I remember I got chills when she said bingo. Carla says bingo. It's such a perfect
Yes.
moment.
Mm.
I want to talk about Emilia's house in Mexico City. It was very rich, you know, paintings everywhere, huge windows, and there was a staircase with no railing on it. I don't think I've ever seen that before. What did you love most about working in that beautiful space?
In fact, I'm architect, and I really like to draw spaces. And this inspiration is Luis Barragan, the famous Mexican architect. And we designed this space to be able to be combined with other spaces like the room and the corridors and everything. It was in different studio. The salon was in a studio, and the room of the kids and was in another studio. And yes, we work a lot with the light and with the colors on this set, typical Mexican colors.
Mm. Yeah, I remember speaking of colors, Selena Gomez's bedroom had the purple bed sheets and the carpet was the animal print carpet.
Yeah, yeah.
What did that tell us about her character, Jessie, that everything was so wild and colorful in her room?
Yeah, yeah, so exactly. It says that, yeah. Mm.
And another set that really stood out to me was the banquet scene where Zoe Saldana is dancing around on the floor. She jumps up on the tables. Um, First of all, was there a safety issue that she's jumping around everywhere? And second of all, where did you get the beautiful chandelier that was hanging up above?
Oui, ça c'est encore un exemple d'une scène qui est vraiment un très bon mix entre des choses très réalistes et complètement abstraites. C'est-à-dire que là, on était directement dans les murs du studio qui étaient noirs. On n'a pas eu à faire de décor autour des tables. En fait, il y avait juste les tables éclairées. Évidemment, on a renforcé une table pour qu'elle puisse sauter dessus. Mais c'est un très bon exemple de ce mélange entre réalisme et abstraction que Jacques a voulu faire dans le film.
So I would say that this scene is a perfect example of the desire and Jacques' desire to mix realism and abstraction in his movie. Because for this particular scene, we had a totally dark studio. And so we didn't need to have, props or sets around the tables because with the light, we were focusing on all the tables. Of course, we reinforced one of the tables so that it was, safe for Rita to jump on it. But this was really the perfect example of this deliberate desire to, mix realism with abstraction.
Mm. And before we go, there's a scene toward the end, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but it's a phone call. There's three characters on the screen on talking on the phone, and two of the characters are standing still with simple colored backgrounds, kind of like this. And what went into that decision just to have the the colors with nothing else behind them?
En fait, au début du process de création, on a fait on s'est rencontré avec toute l'équipe créative, avec évidemment Jacques, avec Virginie Montel qui est la directrice artistique, avec Paul Guillaume le chef opérateur, et on a passé tout le scénario comme ça, scène par scène, pour à chaque fois essayer de réfléchir à des images fortes, qu'est-ce qu'on avait envie d'exprimer. Et ça, c'est venu au cours de ces discussions, en fait, en une sorte de préparation artistique du film. Et c'est ce genre d'idées qui sont sorties de ces ateliers de travail.
So, at the very onset of the creation designing process, we all met. The entire creative team met. So that included Jacques, obviously. It included Virginie Montel, who was in charge of the artistic direction. It included Paul Guillaume, obviously, who is the main photographer and director of photography. And we all studied together as a group the script scene by scene by scene by scene. And if for each scene we were wondering, okay, what is the impactful image we want to have here? And so this particular moment came through those talks amongst ourselves. So it was really a deliberate pre-filming artistic preparation that we did as a group.
Mm. Well, Emmanuelle, it was such a beautiful movie, and we have our fingers crossed for you, all of you, at the upcoming award shows. Thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I am Marcus James Dixon with Gold Derby, and we would like to welcome Guy Hendrix Dyas to our film production design panel for Netflix's Maria. So, Guy, this marks your third collaboration with director Pablo Larraín, and I kind of want to start right there. What keeps you coming back to his films?
Well, at this point, you can imagine we're quite good friends. But it all really started with sort of a chance meeting that was sort of set up by Darren Aronofsky, a mutual friend of ours, and Darren, who I've known for years. But I think basically suggested I might be a good match for Pablo. So it's all Darren's fault, really. That's what I keep telling him anyway. But really, I think the wonderful thing about Pablo is there's such a purity to his filmmaking. I mean, we're talking about a filmmaker who will literally give up everything to make sure his vision is on the screen. There's no sort of creature comforts or things that he needs in any way, shape, or form if it's going to take away from something that he can put on the screen in order to help tell his story, and obviously respect Stephen Knight's script. So I think I just have a huge professional respect for him, and of course his amazing talent, the way he is with actors. As a production designer, you're often on set and you watch interactions between your director and their actresses or actors, and generally speaking, they're pretty damn good. But Pablo seems to have a very special ability to take his performers to places they've never been before. And because I tend to do a lot of the standby as well for Pablo, which means I'm on set all the time, I get to witness that on a daily basis. It's really something quite extraordinary.
And Angelina Jolie plays Maria Callas, one of the great opera singers of the 20th century. What was Angelina like behind the scenes? She seems like such a dedicated actress who is just so in love with the craft.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know what to think, to be honest. When I first met Angie, I'm sure like a lot of people, I was probably, a little reserved and wondered how she was going to be. But she was so warm, so just down to earth and human. There was not a bone of pretension in her body. Highly intelligent, extremely well read on Maria, to the point where we had at least one interaction where she corrected me on a technicality, which I was extremely impressed with when it came to actors' involvement in their own research. And also her sheer dedication. I mean, I've already mentioned how Pablo is masterful at, I think, encouraging a sort of an inner strength or a sort of a boldness in his actors to go a little further than perhaps they would. But he and Angie together really made an extremely intelligent, dynamic duo. They just kept pushing and pushing and pushing this character to places that went even beyond Stephen Knight's extraordinary script. So, but on a day-to-day basis, she was just absolutely wonderful, very gracious, very complimentary about the work that was going on, and generally just all in, which is what you want, isn't it, really?
Yeah. And a lot of the movie takes place on location in Paris, you know, a lot of exterior shots. And what difficulties did you have scouting some of these locations and building some of these sets?
Well, traditionally, for those filmmakers that have shot in Paris, and I'm not talking about the ones that are naturally French, you'll be aware that there are some special golden weeks during the year where you ideally want to shoot Paris, and that's the summer holiday for the Parisians, because they all leave the city and leave you alone to get on with your business. That was the good fortune that I had when working with Christopher Nolan on Inception. When we shot in Paris, we got into Paris when nobody was there. So we were obviously able to blow up that sort of cafe, as you may recall from the film, in slow-mo. We didn't have that luxury. We were actually there in Paris in the late summer. It wasn't quite the fall. We wanted it to be the fall because that was the spirit of the film, and of course the timing of when Maria sadly passed in 1977. But we were there in late summer, and of course it was the Rugby World Cup. So we had all these crazy, you know, Australians and Kiwis and Brits running around. And we had to deal with that huge world sporting event while trying to maintain a sort of a very cool and collected 1977 facade of Paris. It was extremely hard, I have to say.
Well, it seems like you pulled it off on camera. So whatever difficulties you had behind the scenes, those, you know, we can't tell as viewers.
And of course, with a film like Pablo's, there are limited resources for visual effects. We do have visual effects, and they're very, very good, but they are quite limited. So every single shot counts in terms of what you can do in front of the camera. That certainly we had several locations that were stretching at least, I would say, there's a beautiful opening shot, I think, where Maria steps into a line of trees. I don't know if you recall this, it's in the trailer, and all the leaves under the trees, myself and a couple of helpers laid down with bags. We just put all these leaves down within about half an hour. We were exhausted in order to promote that idea that it was the fall. It was autumn.
The tricks of movie making.
Right.
So you actually did get to visit the real life apartment where Maria once lived. What was it like stepping foot into that space?
Quite eerie. Obviously, Pablo and I generally, and we did this, of course, on Spencer, we tried to do our own sort of, I suppose, tour of places where our subject would have been or gone or favored to go as a restaurant or a place. And so we sort of tread in Maria's footsteps all over Paris. It was a glorious couple of weeks of research, but we failed to get into that apartment. And on the last day, I remember we finally twisted somebody's arm. I don't want to dig too deep as to how that happened. And we were able to gain access to this extraordinary place on Georges Mendel, Avenue Georges Mendel's. And it was amazing. You could see the Eiffel Tower, obviously, from what we believe was her bedroom. It might have very well been one of the last things she saw. This is my theory anyway. But if you look at the lovely black and white photographs, which you'll find, all over the internet or on books on Maria, photographic books, famous poses that she would sort of regularly put together. For example, her in front of her marble fireplace. I got to touch and look at the original marble fireplace. The office that she had, where you often saw her interviewed sitting on a couch surrounded by sort of her favorite paintings or awards that she'd received. She'd often get interviewed privately in that part of her house. And we got to look at the more, or rather the less publicized areas, her kitchen, for example, which of course we had to recreate in all its 70s glory. And some of the more private areas, private parlors. We saw what we thought was the dressing room. Obviously, in full disclosure, I completely turned what the dressing room really was into a sort of a theatrical setting, which felt as though it helped with Pablo's vision of sort of wavering between reality and fantasy, as he often does in his films. But it was a really amazing experience. We were not allowed to take photographs, so I had to very, very quickly, in my sketchbook, jot down a plan of the site in order to recreate that later.
And the piano is a big set piece in the movie, and the vanity where she puts on her makeup. How authentic do you think these were to the original pieces?
Well, the piano was exactly what she would have had. We had a real Steinway, but we also had to make a thin Steinway because, of course, our doorways didn't accommodate moving the piano on its wheels by her butler, Ferrucco, couldn't fit through those doors. Normally you would take a piano apart, tip it up on its end. So we had to make a special thin piano, which I was always very frightened if Pablo and Ed didn't shoot from the right angle, you'd see that it was ultra thin. But I think we sort of get away with it. So we had a couple of pianos to pull that trick off. The mirror was a complete fabrication, really. I think Pablo and I had been looking at the classic, theatrical mirror with the light bulbs that go around the edge. And both he and I were sort of a bit feeling as though that had been done to death in numerous films. And he said to me, is there anything else out there that we could use? And I said, well, I had seen a picture of Maria in the Chicago, one of the Chicago venues where she was sitting in a mirror and it had those amazing sort of can lights, those tin lights. And he said, oh, well, why don't we use those? And I said, well, you don't mind stretching the truth? And he said, not at all. I think it's still in the flavor of Maria. So I ended up drawing a pencil sketch of that. And that's ultimately what we built. So it was a complete build. I should point out the circular mirror came out so we could achieve those reverse shots looking at Maria's face and her butler over her shoulder.
Well, Guy, you've been nominated twice at the Oscars for Passengers and for Inception, and our fingers are crossed for you and for the film. It's such a beautiful piece of art, and we're hoping that enough people and enough voters watch it and remember it when it comes time to voting time. So thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
I am Marcus James Dixon with Gold Derby, and we would like to welcome Nora Mendis to our film production design panel for Amazon MGM Studios' Nickel Boys. So, Nora, you are the first production designer that director, co-writer Ramel Ross has worked with. So tell us about that aspect. And do you remember your very first meeting with him and what you discussed in that meeting?
Yes. I mean, it was both similar and not to working with first-time directors, because Ramel is not a first-time director. You know, he made the incredible Hale County This Morning, This Evening, which is a film that I loved. And, you know, and he's a photographer and has his visual art practice that runs very deep. And, you know, when I met him, we clicked immediately. And so we really clicked in the world of the abstract more than like the specificities of production design, because honestly, he didn't really know what production design was and or what exactly I would be responsible for. But, you know, talking about a space, being able to communicate something about the story, about the character, something about a chair, you know, in Hattie's house, being able to communicate stuff about Hattie without her being there, he glommed onto that immediately, and he understood that aspect of, you know, pulling in character through their environment immediately. So that's what we clicked on.
And the movie is based on a book by Colson Whitehead, and it covers some quite disturbing subject matter. And I'm curious, what was your emotional mindset like working on such an important project?
Yeah, I mean, I had read the book when it came out, so I knew the book already. And then when I met with Ramel for the first time, I actually read the book again to make sure that I was up on it. The script, the POV aspect of this of the way we shot the film is in the script, so it feels very different from the book in some ways. And but the historical weight is very much there in both the script and the book. You know, it's dark, it's emotionally heavy, but that's the world that we live in. That's the world that, you know, we embody every day. And the history is not just the history, but there is a long, you know, trail of what happened then that exists now every day in the US. And so it's like, you know, it's on the one hand, sure, it's dark, but history is not history. And that's what we were trying to say in this film, is that this is also the present day. And to put this into this kind of emotional past of like, this is something that happened then, this is something that's not happening now. Let's think of this as a period film, not as something that's emotionally present, I think is what we're pushing against. We didn't want that. And you know, and then also we had a great time on set. We were collaborating, we were like making things happen. We were, you know, like it was also a great collaboration on set. So it wasn't all horrible darkness.
And I'm picturing you rereading the book and like making notes every few paragraphs as the production designer. Was that how you were kind of looking for inspiration?
Not in the book so much. I read the book, just I read it, you know, and I had
Gotcha.
read it the first time, just, you know, totally separate of anything, just because I like Colson Whitehead and I had read his earlier books. And then when I read it before meeting Ramel, you know, the script is so different in some ways than the book, that again, I was just like reading it to refresh, not keeping notes based on the book, because we didn't stick to the book exactly. And it's like we did, but we didn't. But it's like the main sort of twist or like thing that happens in the book in the last bit happens very differently in the movie, even though it does happen, you know.
And if you can talk about some of the interior builds within Nickel Academy itself, which is the brutal reform school at the center of the project, anything that really stands out that you'd like to bring up right now?
Sure. I mean, the big one is that the White House, where the beatings happen at Dozier, was a full build, but on an existing campus. And so we shot, it's probably about 2/3 of what is Nickel Academy, which is based on a real school in Florida called Dozier, which, by the way, only closed in 2011. So getting
Wow.
back to that idea that these places exist now and this history is present as opposed to past. You know, that's true in what this book is based on as well. You know, it's like I had to imagine that Nickel Academy, you know, it doesn't close in 1960 when the movie's set. It closes, you know, 50 years later. And so a lot of those same structures are still there 50 years later. But the White House was a full build, but we needed to see both the exterior and the, you know, the exterior when we're walking around the campus, we see other buildings. And then also we shoot the inside. And so there was nothing about it that was sort of a fake build or a, you know, there was no movement, you know, we didn't move the walls, we didn't change, you know, there was a ceiling on it, all of that. And more than that, there's this really apt description in the book where there's grass, long grass around the White House because the kids are the ones who are doing the mowing. And it's like they're afraid to even come too close to the White House to do the mowing because such horrors are happening in there. And so it's like important to us that we build it early enough that we could have, you know, the landscaping, the greens, all of that look correct when we see these exterior shots.
And you mentioned the POV structure of the film. What was the collaboration like with the cinematographer regarding this unique structure? And like, how did you talk about which of your sets, which part of your sets would be seen, which parts wouldn't?
Yeah, I mean the POV was such an integral part of it, and it very much was in the script, but I feel like nobody truly believed that that the whole movie was going to be POV until we started shooting, including the studio. and and when they, fully realized that it was like, oh no, this whole movie is POV. And when we did the camera test and we understood sort of which camera rigs were going to be used in order to shoot the way, like what would be in focus and what would not be in focus and that kind of thing. Jomo Frey, amazing cinematographer, we would talk about in the sets, basically. I would do a walkthrough with Ramel a couple of days before. We would be talking through the space, and I would say, look, here's the space. I know we're not going to really see a lot of it, but here's 10 things in this space that, might be nice to go in on as the camera is moving around, as the viewer is putting their gaze on certain objects. So, in Hattie's kitchen, for example, we've got the telephone, we have the magnets on the refrigerator, we have the JFK calendar, all these things that are very specific to that sort of working class, middle class Black home of that time. And there's tons of stuff, the drawers are full of stuff. There's all kinds of places where, Elwood could be looking, where the gaze of the camera, the gaze, his POV could be looking, where he just doesn't. But I gave Jomo and Ramel those options, on the day to be like, oh, look over here, or not,
It must have been interesting for the actors because like some of them are looking directly into the camera and they're told their whole lives, don't look at the camera. And now this is such a different, unique experience for them.
Yes.
Speaking of the cast, I mean, Anjanou Ellis-Taylor, one of my favorites. I'm rooting for her at the Academy Awards. What was it like working with her and some of the other cast members?
I mean, she's amazing. They were all great. I mean, her doing Her House, which we shot in New Orleans, was really an incredible experience. We got to get into such a level of detail. It was a real house that we, added walls, added plugs, etc., changed it around a bit, but it was, a real location. And she had a good time in that space, kind of picking out certain things, certain details to look at. One tiny detail is that in the opening of the film, in the little opening montage, we see her at work, through Elwood's eyes, cleaning up some broken crockery, a broken plate or something with a dustpan, sort of in her role in this Jim Crow era space of subservience. And we see her work. And then later when Elwood is in his bedroom after the car incident has happened that does send him to nickel, we have our focus on his hand in his bedroom, and we see that the carpet that we saw in the beginning at her work is the same carpet that's in his bedroom, as if she took home cutoffs from her work of the carpet and used it in her, in her grandson's room. And so it was like details like this, which Anjanou actually picked up on a lot of them in the house. And again, that was just one that we, sort of see. You don't really see it in the first viewing, but it's there, and she noticed.
How easy is it in 2023 when you film this? How easy or hard is it to get, authentic props from the 1960s and authentic, wallpaper and carpets and things like that?
I mean, it depends on how sort of your relationship with authenticity. And so it's like we did a lot of research on, what was correct, period correct. And a lot of the stuff is period correct. In New Orleans, there's a lot more great stuff that you can just buy at vintage stores than you would find in New York, honestly. That's correct, like the correct time period. We didn't have the budget, though, to make everything exactly period correct. And so it's more about having the research and the grounding of the research and having a sense of what was important to be exactly right and what looked right enough. And so, it's hard and also not hard. I don't know. And so some specific things we got from prop houses that felt really important, and there's a lot of things that we made, but the wallpaper that we see in the 1970s empty apartment when the adult Elwood is moving the big brass bed out. All of that is actual, you know, dead stock 1970s metallic wallpaper. That apartment that we used for that scene, the empty apartment scene, is the same apartment that we used for the 1970s, his actual 1970s apartment. And so it was important that we use this crazy metallic wallpaper to kind of distract from the geography of the space so that the viewer does not realize that they're actually the same, you know, the same space.
Well, before we go, the movie is opening in theaters on December 13th. And I'm curious, what do you hope is the number one thing that audiences take away from this project when they go and see it?
You know, in a lot of ways, I think that the POV of the movie and what I tried to portray in the timelessness of the production design, in that it was rooted in the 60s, but could easily be the present day in the institutional aspects. I want that to show what it means to be Black and to have this history, both in the present day and then, and to not be able to so easily put that past in the past, you know? And I think that the POV does a really good job of that, because it kind of forces you in that body, just in the act of watching the movie. And I hope the production design also kind of reminds you that this world is ongoing.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with us, Nora. And stick around, everyone. We're going to do our panel up next. I am Marcus James Dixon with Gold Derby, and we would like to welcome back to our film production design panel Emmanuelle Duplay for Emilia Pérez and Nora Mendis for Nickel Boys. Welcome back. And also Stephanie, the interpreter here. So I'd like to start out by asking, what is something about your profession, about production design, that is misunderstood or that viewers at home may not realize is something that you do? Emmanuelle, let's start with you on this one.
Oui, bah, particulièrement sur Emilia Pérez, tout le film est entièrement fait en studio. Et c'est vrai que bon, les gens le réalisent pas. En fait, quand on fait un travail en studio, on essaye que ça soit le plus réaliste possible. Et souvent, les gens ne voient pas tout le travail de construction de l'espace qu'on a pu faire. Là, ce qui est intéressant dans Emilia Pérez, c'est que c'est un mix entre du réalisme et de l'abstrait. Donc, il y a justement cette possibilité d'avoir les deux et de se rendre compte que l'outil qu'est le studio, par exemple dans des scènes, par exemple la danse de Jessie qui sort de sa chambre, elle arrive comme ça, elle sort de sa chambre et elle est dans le studio noir pour finir la danse.
Especially for Emilia Pérez, you know, the entire film takes place in studios. And so the audience does not realize this necessarily. We want, of course, always to, you know, make it as realistic as possible. And people don't necessarily don't necessarily see that at all. That, you know, there's so much built behind the scenes, so people are not necessarily aware of that. And in Emilia Pérez, this was wonderful because the studio allowed us to mix realism with abstraction. So we had the possibility to combine both. So we really could use the tool that the studio represents. For example, when Jessie gets out of her room, she just ends up being in complete darkness so that she can start performing her dance.
And Nora, how about you? Something that's misunderstood about production design, or something that viewers at home just don't know what you even do?
I mean, I think for a period film showing the time period and having a sense that just because it's set in the 1960s doesn't mean that everything should be from the 1960s. And in fact, in Nickel Boys, most things should really be from the 1940s or earlier, because things are not brand new and nobody exists in a space where everything is brand new at all. And especially when you're representing, you know, working class, lower middle class households versus some of the fancier spaces that they're in. You know, it's just having an awareness that a period film does not mean that everything needs to be, you know, perfect for that year, and that is actually kind of distracting. So that I think thinking about the motivation of how a character, you know, how a person furnishes their home or the place that they work, or, you know, the penitentiary that they're in, you know, the juvenile delinquent home that they're in, like what is the difference between you know, sleeping spaces and recreational spaces. You know, in Nickel Boys in the Rec Room, there's clearly stuff that's left over from the white portion of the school that is all still, you know, fine and good, but is not new and shouldn't be, you know.
Very fascinating, both of those answers. I love those. I want to kind of go back to the beginnings of both of your careers, and what would you consider to be your big break in the industry, and how did you get into production design, into this field to begin with? Nora, how about you start out this one?
Sure. I mean, I went to undergrad for experimental film, and you know, so I made a lot of silent Super 8 films, and it was very much on track to a gallery and museum world, not at all on track towards the industry. And you know, so I have a background in kind of some of the things that Ramel is referencing. So in some ways, this has gone full circle with this kind of experimental background, but you know, I came into the art department, and I did not come from architecture, and I worked my way up. I was a set deck for years, and you know, I drove cube trucks in New York City, knocked off a few mirrors, and you know, and then ended up here. I worked in the world of TV. You know, I did a few HBO shows, designed Betty with Crystal Moselle. I did Random Acts of Flyness with Terrence. You know, I worked with these extraordinary, weird, experimental directors, you know, but in the like HBO studio space where we're building everything, and they didn't really know what that meant or want to do that necessarily. But being there and being like, no, we can build all this and make it feel real, make it feel like the sizes are not too big, and make it not feel, you know, overly fake. You know, so that was really important in the beginning. And then for me, it's always just been collaboration with specific directors, as opposed to like a big break. And so it's like, you know, I did a pilot with Janixa Bravo, which was an amazing experience. You know, working with Ramel was really important for me. Doing Passing with Rebecca Hall was really great. You know, it's like these films were less about kind of a big break for production design, although they were, I guess, but like more for, you know, working with these specific people.
And for you, Emmanuelle?
Bah moi je suis architecte, donc je suis vraiment, j'ai commencé de travailler dans la décoration par l'architecture, en fait. Ce qui m'intéresse beaucoup, c'est de travailler des espaces. Donc voilà, j'ai commencé comme ça petit à petit, et puis j'ai eu la chance de rencontrer aussi des réalisateurs formidables. D'ailleurs, l'année dernière, j'ai travaillé sur Anatomie d'une chute, qui était aux Oscars l'année dernière, de Justine Triet, où là, il n'y avait pas vraiment de studio, mais il y avait, on a refait tout un chalet enfin, ce chalet faisait partie vraiment du scénario, quoi. C'était comme un troisième personnage.
So I am an architect, actually. So when I started in this, you know, production design world, it was really through this background, through the architecture background. And what I actually love in my job is to work on spaces. So I gradually got into it, and along the way, I met wonderful filmmakers. For instance, last year I collaborated in the Oscar-nominated movie Anatomy of a Fall, as you probably know, by Justine Triet. And we didn't really work in studios that much, but we actually had to rebuild entirely a chalet. And so this chalet was actually really part of the script. It was like a third character.
And I'm curious, looking back on your careers, do you have a most memorable or unique set that you've ever helped to create on any project? Something that, you know, you'll look back fondly years from now, decades from now, and say, I can't believe I was able to build that or to create that. Emmanuelle, how about you?
I think, in fact, it's always the last movie. I feel like it's always the last project. You always think, it was crazy. At the moment, I'm working with French director who win also a Golden Palm is Julia Ducournau. Sorry, and it's always like that. The next or the last one is always the most crazy, I think.
And for you, Nora?
I did a project called Topside, which is set in the subway tunnels about community of people who live in the subways in New York City. And we didn't have access to the subways in New York City, but we got a subway tunnel that was built in Rochester, New York, by the same architect as a lot of the New York City older subway tunnels. And so we were filming and building, you know, this community inside a real sort of falling apart subway tunnel in Rochester in like it was maybe March or April when we were there. And so in upstate New York, that's still like there is a lot of snow. It's still like real winter. And that was probably the craziest location and we built an entire, you know, we needed 8 houses plus, you know, and by houses, I mean sort of shacks, but, you know, spaces that had beds and spaces to be in and that really had to glow from the outside because we would have these shots going down the track where you see the glowing of each house. And, you know, that was kind of one of the craziest spaces. I was also pregnant at the time and we're like underground in this like really dark, weird space. And it was definitely memorable.
I'd love to talk about budgets, and studios give you a certain budget. And what are some tricks of the trade you've learned along the way that you can get your most out of the money that you have? Is there any secrets you can spill? How about you, Nora?
I mean, this is not at all a secret, but I think the biggest thing is that it is worth spending more money on amazing people and collaborators than on the objects. And because when you bring in people who have experience and have creativity in their own right, you know, the job is such a collaboration. You know, as a production designer on Nickel Boys, I work with so many people, all of whom were from the New Orleans area. I didn't bring anybody who I had worked with before. So it was an entirely new crew for me. And, you know, I fought to get the rates higher sort of at the loss of some of my, you know, rentals and materials budgets. And because I got this, you know, I worked with this amazing set decorator, Monique Champagne. Shout out to her. She's just like knew New Orleans, knew everything that you could get within, you know, a 10-hour radius. And I also had an incredible scenic team, which for a period film, there is a fine line between a scenic crew that makes things look right, maybe for a TV or something that's not so detailed, you know, and then something that's just more careful. And my scenic crew was amazing, and it was because it was worth it to me to pay rates for people that were above the lines of the parameters of Nickel Boys. But we got better people. They were amazing. And it's like, and this job is a collaboration. And it's not like I'm out there doing everything by myself at all. You need to be able to trust the people that you're working with. So that was the biggest thing for this. I mean, there really is no secret. I don't think, not that I found.
Emmanuelle, what do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree with what you said. In France, I feel that the budgets are really lower than in the States. So we are often doing, I mean, je vais passer en français, on est beaucoup moins nombreux, les équipes sont beaucoup moins nombreuses qu'aux États-Unis. J'ai travaillé un petit peu à Los Angeles et à New York aussi, et je vois comment les équipes sont. Nous, en France, on est moins nombreux. Donc, mais je suis tout à fait d'accord sur le fait qu'il faut mieux dépenser de l'argent sur d'avoir de bons collaborateurs et la quantité suffisante que en accessoires et en matériaux, c'est sûr.
In France, you know, our budgets are usually lower than those in the United States, oftentimes also our teams are, you know, more reduced than the big teams in the United States. I know this because I worked in on projects in Los Angeles and New York City in the past. But in France, really, we're usually, less people. But I agree with you that it's, your money is best used to bring in the good collaborators, enough collaborators as well. It's more important than, spending on props and other materials.
And do any of you have personal heroes within the production design industry? Maybe someone you've always looked up to and you've always wanted to work with? Anyone whose sets and builds have always stuck in your memories? Emmanuelle, how about you?
We have the famous Alexandre Troneur, this French production designer that, I mean, it's a historical work, but it's really interesting. I would say him, yeah.
Nora?
I'm sorry, I'm terrible with pulling names like on the spur of the moment like this. So off the top of my head, no.
Gotcha. Well, before we go, I would love to talk about awards. Awards season is coming up. The Oscars, the Production Design Guild, and other awards around the country and around the world. What do awards mean to you? What could they mean to your movie if your movie gets nominated? If you personally get nominated? We're an awards website at Gold Derby, so we love talking about this kind of thing. Nora, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I think that the main thing is that awards give the film more exposure. And so Nickel Boys has not come out yet, so we don't really have a sense of what the exposure will be in the mainstream. The reaction at the festivals has been amazing, but festivals are a bit of a bubble of people who already love movies. And so, I'm from Chicago. I'm from the south side of Chicago, which is like a, 99% Black part of Chicago. And my parents are wondering if Nickel Boys is going to come. They're like, movies like this sort of come to the South Side sometimes. And I was like, I hope it does, And if it's up for awards, I think it's more likely that it'll make it to these communities. And that's important. Awards are great. It's hard to say what an award does exactly, but I think the exposure for the film and for the filmmakers and, for Ramel and Jocelyn would be amazing. Ramel deserves every single bit of the kind of creativity and the idea that this film that is a bit outside of the mainstream in terms of the POV, in terms of the montage, in terms of the archival, all of that was made by a studio, I think if it wins awards or even is nominated, will allow for studios to imagine outside of the confines of this very specific mainstream filmmaking. And maybe they will allow more films that are weirder and just not on the exact track.
I always love the experimental films, the weird films. Those always tend to be my favorites. And Emmanuelle, close us out here. What do awards mean to you?
En France, on a le Festival de Cannes, les Césars, voilà. Donc ça, moi, comme je fais, enfin, ça m'arrive assez souvent d'être nominée aux Césars et puis d'avoir des films qui sont à Cannes, qui ont des prix. Ça c'est quelque chose d'assez usuel. Mais tout d'un coup, les Oscars, aux États-Unis, c'est vraiment autre chose en fait. C'est complètement un autre. Pour nous, les Français, c'est formidable. Et c'est surtout formidable pour la visibilité du film. Voilà, pour Jacques Audiard, c'est formidable.
So in France, we have the Cannes Festival, as you know, the César or Caesar Awards, and I often get nominated for the Caesar Awards and often as well for the Cannes Festival Awards. So that's one thing. But here to have this film nominated for the Oscars in the United States, it's completely different. Okay. And so it's wonderful, for France. It's wonderful for this movie's visibility, and it's also wonderful for Jacques. Pardon, Emmanuelle, vous vouliez dire?
Okay. No, je disais, if it's...
if it gets The prize,
Nominated.
you mean? Okay, if it gets the prize, it would be wonderful for Jacques and it would be wonderful for the movie visibility.
Mhm. Well, thank you all for chatting with us today. I learned so much about what you do, and everyone should go out and see your movies, Emilia Pérez and Nickel Boys. Thank you and best of luck coming up at the awards season.
Thank you. Thank you very much.